You build a multi-million-dollar bank from the ground up, and then get kicked out by your own board like a stranger. But what they didn't know, you had receipts, the law, and a legacy waiting in the wings. This isn't just revenge. This is a takeover. If you think getting kicked out was the end of her story, think again. Stick around till the end to witness how she turned the tables with power, proof, and purpose. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that flip the script. It was just past 8 a.m. when Alicia Monroe stepped out of her black sedan, heels clicking sharply against the pavement outside the gleaming downtown tower that bore her name. Monroe First National, etched in silver above the entrance, was more than a name, it was a symbol. Built from the ground up over a decade, it was the nation's first black woman-led banking institution to hit $2 billion in assets. But today, Alicia wasn't arriving for a press conference or a ribbon cutting. She was arriving unannounced, something she did often to stay connected with her employees. She wore no designer bag, no security entourage, just a navy blue pantsuit, a tablet tucked under one arm, and the quiet authority of a woman who knew this building brick by brick. But as she stepped toward the glass doors, a young security guard in a freshly pressed uniform stepped in front of her, blocking the way. His name tag read B. Carter, and he looked barely out of his 20s. "Ma'am, we're not letting in any customers right now," he said firmly, holding up a hand. Alicia blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me. There's a private meeting upstairs. No public access." She tilted her head slightly. "Do I look like the public to you?" He frowned, his tone hardening. "Look, I'm just doing my job. You'll need to leave." Alicia reached into her bag and pulled out her ID badge, the word CEO glinting beneath her photo. "I built this place. That's my meeting upstairs." But Carter didn't even look at it. They said no exceptions. The doors behind him locked with a click. People began to stare. Employees passed by, some pausing with wide eyes, others quickly averting their gaze. A barista across the street even pulled out their phone and started recording. The woman who had once graced Forbes and Fast Company was now being denied entry into her own empire. For a flicker of a moment, Alicia felt it, the sting of invisibility. Not as a CEO. Not even as a woman. But as a black woman being told, without a second thought, that she didn't belong in the very space she built. She stood silent, composed. But her eyes burned with something deeper than embarrassment. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a warning shot. And Alicia Monroe never ignored a warning. 2 floors above the glass doors Alicia Monroe was just barred from entering. The temperature in the executive boardroom had dropped several degrees, not physically, but morally. A dozen figures sat around a sleek obsidian conference table, but the chair at the head, Alicia's chair, remained conspicuously empty. Her monogrammed leather folder had been quietly removed. Her nameplate vanished. And not one person mentioned it. At the far end of the table sat Trevor Langston, the acting CFO, wearing a smug half-smile as he tapped his pen against the marble. "All in favor of initiating the emergency succession protocol, say, aye." A slow chorus of "aye" echoed around the room, some voices hesitant, others far too eager. Only one hand didn't rise, Camille Bright, Alicia's longtime chief of operations. She stared daggers at Trevor. "You know this is illegal." Trevor didn't flinch. "No, Camille. It's called corporate recalibration. Alicia's been distracted. Media deals, activism, expanding too fast. This bank needs stability." "Stability," Camille hissed. "You mean control. You mean your hands on the throne she built." Trevor's smile sharpened. "Come now. Let's not act like Alicia was irreplaceable." But she was. What Trevor and the others refused to admit was that this empire only existed because of Alicia's fearless leadership, her ability to secure underserved communities while navigating the vicious terrain of high finance. She had weathered recessions, racial bias, and Wall Street sabotage. But none of those enemies had dared to stab her from within. Until now. Hidden beneath legal jargon and board policy was a secret. Trevor and a few aligned directors had been quietly moving money into shadow accounts, misclassifying bonuses, and rerouting client assets. Alicia had started asking questions. Too many. And that made her dangerous. So they struck first. With the aid of a few freshly appointed board members and a fast-tracked vote of no confidence, conducted while Alicia was locked out downstairs, Trevor declared her temporarily unfit for executive duties. In just under 30 minutes, they rewrote the rules, changed system access, revoked her clearance, all while sipping lattes in leather chairs she'd paid for. Downstairs, Alicia was unaware of the full betrayal. But the air had shifted. And Trevor Langston, for all his arrogance, had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He underestimated the woman who built the kingdom. Outside, Alicia Monroe stood on the front steps of her own bank, a silent storm cloaked in calm. People moved around her, heads turning, phones raised. The woman who once rang the NASDAQ bell was now being treated like a trespasser. And the humiliation wasn't over. The young security guard, Carter, was on the phone with someone upstairs. He kept his eyes on Alicia like she was a threat instead of the visionary who had brought this entire institution to life. Alicia took a breath. Controlled. Composed. "Get me your supervisor," she said, voice clipped but measured. Carter lowered the phone. "He's already aware. Ma'am, they've revoked all your credentials. If you don't leave now, I'll have to call reinforcements." Alicia narrowed her eyes. "They." Her voice held steel. He didn't answer. Moments later, 2 more guards appeared, older, bulkier, with the kind of demeanor that didn't ask questions. One of them glanced at Carter, then at Alicia, and shook his head in disbelief. "Is this for real?" "She's refusing to leave," Carter said flatly. "I am the CEO of this bank," Alicia snapped, stepping forward. "Look at the plaque on that wall. Look up my name." But the lead guard had already received the order. "I'm sorry, Ms. Monroe," he said, almost sympathetically. "They told us to escort you off the premises." "Escort me," Alicia repeated, her voice low. And that's when the final straw snapped. One of the guards gently touched her elbow, not forcefully, but enough to make the cameras flash. The moment was frozen in time, a black woman in a tailored suit, being removed from her own bank while the public watched. People gasped. A few started shouting. Someone across the street yelled, "That's Alicia Monroe. What the hell are y'all doing?" Within minutes, hashtags began trending. Hashtag Monroe locked out. Hashtag let her lead. But Alicia didn't shout. She didn't cry. She straightened her back, pulled out her phone, and began recording herself. Her voice was calm, but her eyes, they burned with fire. "I just got locked out of the company I built from scratch," she said to the camera. "But if they think this is over, they don't know who I am." It wasn't just a moment of embarrassment. It was the start of a war. And Alicia Monroe never loses a war. Alicia sat on the granite steps outside the building like a queen unjustly exiled from her own kingdom. Her back straight, her jaw tight, and her phone in her lap, still recording. People passed by whispering her name, some with sympathy, others with disbelief. Her assistant, Zuri, burst through the crowd, breathless, holding a manila folder as if it were on fire. "Boss," Zuri said, eyes wide. "You need to see this." Alicia stood, took the folder, and flipped it open. Inside were photocopies, screenshots, and encrypted emails, pages of damning evidence that Zuri had quietly compiled over the past 3 weeks. At first, they were just red flags. Then they turned into fraudulent transactions, unauthorized transfers, forged votes, and backdoor payments to shell companies. All of it tied directly to Trevor Langston and 2 other board members. Alicia's eyes scanned the pages like a detective, piecing together the final act of a crime thriller. "They weren't trying to just push me out," she said coldly. "They've been stealing." Zuri nodded, nervous. "And they knew you were onto them. That's why today happened." Alicia closed the folder with the precision of a guillotine blade. She picked up her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't used in years. "Aunt Sylvia, U.S. Treasury. Not just her godmother, but a powerful compliance director in the federal banking system with deep ties to regulatory oversight. She hit call. The line picked up in 2 rings. "Alicia," came the warm, curious voice. "They just tried to take my bank," Alicia said, voice steady but dark. "And I have proof of multiple felonies. I need a federal audit. Immediately." There was a pause. Then came Sylvia's voice, steel wrapped in velvet. "Send everything. I'll have agents in that building before the sun rises tomorrow." Alicia hung up and turned to Zuri. "Mobilize the team," she said. "Legal, PR, cyber. Get every copy backed up. And leak just enough to get the public curious." Zuri blinked. "What are you about to do?" Alicia looked up at her tower, the same tower that just spat her out. "I'm about to remind them who I am. Not with tears. Not with shouting. With strategy." Her voice dropped an octave. "If they wanted war, they should have read my resume first." By sundown, the calm city skyline had begun to tremble under the weight of a brewing storm, one with a name, Alicia Monroe. In a private suite of a downtown hotel, Alicia turned the living room into a war room. Legal pads, laptops, and glowing screens filled the space. Her inner circle, Zuri, her head legal counsel Marcus Wynn, and digital strategist Lella Banks, sat in focused silence, the kind of silence that comes before a precise strike. Alicia stood in front of the TV, her finger tapping the remote. The news ticker at the bottom of the screen now read, "Viral video, Black CEO locked out of her own bank." Her face was everywhere. On Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. Hashtags like hashtag let her lead, hashtag Monroe first, and hashtag bank on her trended globally. But Alicia wasn't after sympathy. She was after justice. "Marcus," she said, not looking away from the screen. "File an emergency injunction by midnight. I want to cease and desist on any board activity and full preservation of electronic records." "Already drafting it," Marcus replied. "We'll hit them with corporate malfeasance and fiduciary breach." "Good," she said. "Lella." "We're feeding the story in stages," Lella said with a smirk. "I dropped the first leak on a fintech blog an hour ago, highlighted her being physically removed. Tomorrow morning, I'll leak the shell accounts to a whistleblower page. By the time the feds arrive, the court of public opinion will already have a verdict." Alicia smiled. Then she stepped onto the suite's balcony, looked out at the glowing lights of the tower that once welcomed her with open arms. Inside that building, Trevor Langston and his allies were still under the illusion that they had won. But outside, the people were rallying. Black-owned businesses, civil rights leaders, financial influencers, all calling out the injustice. Customer withdrawals surged. Complaints flooded Monroe First's social media accounts. And Alicia? She was playing chess while they played checkers. "They wanted to erase me," she said, mostly to herself. "Now I'll leave a mark they'll never scrub off the marble." Then her phone buzzed. A message from Aunt Sylvia. "Agents are en route. Wear your power suit." Alicia grinned. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be knocking on the door. She'd be walking straight through it, with the law, the media, and the people at her back. At precisely 8:07 a.m., the front doors of Monroe First National swung open, this time not to Alicia Monroe, but to 4 federal agents in dark suits, carrying leather-bound files and stern expressions. They moved with the quiet force of inevitability, past the stunned receptionist and security desk. Their badges caught the morning light like warning flares. The lead agent approached the front desk and uttered a sentence that would change everything. "We're here under order of the U.S. Department of Treasury. Effective immediately, this facility is under federal audit." Inside the executive boardroom, Trevor Langston was mid-sentence, boasting about their new era of financial leadership, when the doors burst open. Every head turned. The lead agent stepped in, flanked by 2 others. "Mr. Langston, Ms. Reyes, Mr. Patel, you're all being served with subpoenas for financial misconduct and obstruction. Please remain seated and do not access any digital devices. Trevor's face drained of color. Wait, what is this? Who called you? Behind the agents, Alicia Monroe entered. She wore a tailored power suit, cobalt blue with silver accents. Her walk was slow, deliberate, heels clicking like a countdown. Silence swallowed the room. Trevor stood, stammering. You can't be here. You've been removed. Wrong, Alicia said, her voice slicing through the tension. You tried to remove me. Big difference. She turned to the federal agents. Check the server logs. Start with the email trails tied to Bright Grove Holdings. That's where they've been funneling client assets. An agent nodded. Already pulled. We've seen enough to freeze all executive actions pending investigation. Outside the boardroom, chaos rippled through the office. Employees whispered. Phones rang off the hook. And the same guard who'd escorted Alicia out the day before? He stood at the lobby doors now, this time holding them open for her. He nodded quietly. Sorry, Ms. Monroe. She returned the nod. You were just following orders. Now the right ones are in place. In under an hour, passwords were revoked, accounts frozen, and several board members were led out of the building. Trevor, in cuffs, turned back one last time. This isn't over. Alicia didn't flinch. No, Trevor, she said coldly. For you, it just is. The marble floors of Monroe First National echoed differently that morning. Where there had once been whispers of scandal and betrayal, now came the sound of reverence, awe, and redemption. Employees lined the glass corridors, peeking over cubicle walls and leaning out of office doors as Alicia Monroe strode through the building. Not as a visitor, not as a guest, but as a sovereign returning to her throne. Every step she took was a reminder. You can't exile a legacy. Behind her walked Zuri, Marcus, and the federal agents, not to protect her, but to bear witness. News crews gathered outside. Live broadcasts rolled. The headlines blared. CEO reinstated after federal raid confirms embezzlement plot. Alicia Monroe returns to Monroe First, with the law behind her. As she entered the top-floor executive suite, the air seemed to still. The desk, once cleared of her personal items, now bore a sealed envelope and a small stack of apology letters. The interim staff had already begun reinstating her systems and returning her access. She didn't sit right away. She moved to the window, overlooking the city skyline she had once conquered with grit and vision. The very skyline that had watched her be dragged out of her own building like a trespasser. Now, she was here to stay. Camille, her loyal COO who had resisted the coup from the inside, stepped into the office and closed the door behind her. They're saying your reinstatement was the fastest corporate reversal in banking history, Camille said, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Alicia smirked. Good. Let them talk. Let them write headlines. But what matters is this, she turned around. This place will never run on fear or sabotage again. She picked up the framed photo from her desk, her younger self, standing outside the bank on opening day, full of fire and ambition. I built this for the people who were told they didn't belong in the rooms where money moves, she said quietly. So from now on, transparency won't be a buzzword. It'll be policy. She finally sat in her chair, and exhaled. Across the city, the internet buzzed with praise. Journalists called it a masterclass in leadership. But Alicia didn't need the headlines. She had her name back. And no one would ever try to steal it again. 3 weeks later, the lobby of Monroe First National was unrecognizable, not just in design, but in energy. Gone were the sterile, cold tones of corporate elitism. In their place, bold murals of community, rotating exhibits of Black financial pioneers, and an open digital hub where local entrepreneurs could walk in and pitch ideas. It was no longer just a bank. It was a movement. And at the center of it all stood Alicia Monroe, radiant in a soft ivory suit, standing behind a podium with the Monroe First logo now shimmering in gold behind her. The cameras rolled. Every major financial outlet in the country tuned in. I stand before you today not as a victim of corporate betrayal, she began, voice calm but commanding, but as a woman who refused to be erased. The audience, employees, clients, activists, and media, erupted in applause. They tried to shut me out of the building I built, she continued. But what they didn't understand is that the blueprint wasn't in those walls. It was in me. Behind her, a large screen displayed the newest initiative, the Monroe Fund, a $250 million micro-investment program for Black-owned startups, women-led ventures, and community cooperatives. I didn't come back just to reclaim my seat, Alicia said. I came back to expand the table. And if that table's too small, we'll build a bigger one. Zuri and Camille watched proudly from the side, tears in their eyes. The same woman who had once been walked out in humiliation was now leading the most radical transformation in the banking world. As the event wrapped, a journalist called out, "What's next for you, Ms. Monroe?" Alicia smiled. Not the kind of smile you give for the cameras, but the kind that comes from surviving fire and choosing to rebuild instead of burn everything down. "What's next?" she echoed. "Legacy, ownership, and teaching every little black girl who's told she's too much, too loud, or too ambitious, that she was never too anything. She was just early." As she stepped off the stage, applause thundered like a tidal wave. The bank was hers again. Her name, untarnished. Her purpose, reborn. And now, the world wasn't just watching. The world was learning. Legacy wasn't given. She earned it, and sealed it, forever. They tried to erase her, humiliate her, and claim what she built, but she didn't just fight back. She rewrote the rules, reclaimed her throne, and built a legacy no one could touch. Because when a black woman owns her power, the world has no choice but to take notice.